If you don't, don't get your Steve Jobs screener.
No, I shouldn't be here. No, I think my first movie was Ragtime.
That's right.
So
you're the cop.
I'm assuming that something happened around that regarding SAG. There might have been a Taft-Hartley thing or something, but I doubt it. I think I got it.
Your first movie is an Oscar-nominated Best Picture, directed by Milos.
I had just done a back-to-back with Scott Rudin and Amy Pascal, who at the time was the chairwoman of Sony. I had just done back-to-back The Social Network and Moneyball. So we had a very good working relationship. And Scott Rudin has a habit of taking people who he likes and just putting them in his pocket. You're forced to be in his orbit. And he called me along with my agent, which is what he'll do too. My agent won't call. There's no chance for a private conversation. Scott will call me with my agent, R. Emanuel, as he did, and he said, here's your next movie. You're going to do, we just bought Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson's book, and you're going to do it. And I said, okay.
Wow.
It was a blind date at first, but one that I ultimately fell in love with. After months and months and months of really not knowing what I was going to do, we were actually doing the newsroom at the time, and I kept thinking, during the first, I'll write it during the first hiatus, and I couldn't figure it out during the first hiatus, and then during the second hiatus, I got my foot in the door. I got my foot in the door by spending a lot of time talking to all of the real people who were in the movie, with the exception, of course, of Steve, who had passed away by the time I had started, and then several dozen other people, including, and most importantly, Lisa Brennan Jobs, who did not participate in Walter's book because her father was alive at the time, but was willing to speak to me, to spend time with me. And then the other person who was crucial, who also did not participate in Walter's book, was John Scully, who was suddenly willing to talk to me, and he was eager to tell me, what he called the real story of what happened that night when Steve tried to stage this coup and sort of forced him to that whole thing. And suddenly, between Scully and Lisa and Woz and Joanna Hoffman and Andy Hertzfeld, these points of friction began to make themselves clear in Steve's personal life. And I came up, with this non-biopic structure with which to dramatize those points of friction. And I want to be really clear about something. There is not a single fact about the life of Steve Jobs or the life of anyone else who's in this movie that has been distorted, perverted, or invented. Not one, except one. Steve did not have confrontations with the same 5 people 40 minutes before every product launch. That's something that a writer invents in order to tell the story. But everything else, down to the tiniest.
We were doing season 3, and we knew that was the end, and that's fine. Happy to end it, and we had heard that Jobs was his next thing. So we said, well, let's at least come around behind and throw the hat in the ring, and just and then we'll whatever. And
there was but there was no angling, and there was no hat. There couldn't have been less angling, you son of a bitch. Okay. Here is what happened. Everybody wanted Jeff to play this part. Okay. Scott, Danny, the studio, everybody wanted Jeff to play this part. And it was either Scott or Danny, I can't remember which, said to me, you go to work with him every day, why don't you approach him? Which I never get to do. It's always handled by agents. I never get to walk up to Jeff Daniels and say, do you want to play this part in this movie? And I did. I remember we were standing by the damn anchor desk, and I said, everybody wants you to play his part. And he said, okay. I was like, Jeff, it's a really good part. It's not like we're asking you to play the waiter. He's got really good scenes, I swear to God. I'm going to give you the script, it's going to take a while to read. So there was no angling.
But it's exactly what happened. And at least on my end, him going, hey, by the way, do you want to play Scully? And I was like, okay. I didn't say, well, let me read the script. Well, I've got some notes. It was like, okay, and then send me the script and the audition was 3 years. I mean, that's how I would
to play the part. It did not matter to me at all, or to Danny, or to anyone, that either Michael or anyone else bear a physical resemblance to the character that they were playing or do an impersonation of the character that they were playing. In fact, I thought it was very helpful that Michael didn't, or that anyone we were going to consider didn't, because I wanted to be able to signal to the audience right away that what they were watching was not literal. Something you don't have to do if this were a play. What you've seen in this movie happens on stage all the time. It's not at all unusual in that regard. It's less common in a movie. So something needed to signal to the audience exactly what I said before, that Steve never had confrontations with the same 5 people 40 minutes before every product launch, that this was going to be a painting and not a photograph, and that I thought that by casting somebody who does not physically remind you of Steve Jobs, and by not using any kind of makeup to get him there, that was going to help. What you needed to do was, during the NFL draft, when they're drafting college players, there are some teams who use all kinds of algorithms and months of figuring out to figure out exactly what they need. What we need is a defensive end. And so with our first pick, we're just going to take the best defensive end that's up there. And then there are other teams that say, we're going to take the best athlete on the board, okay? And we're going to put the 22 best athletes that we can get our hands on the field, and that's how we're going to win football games. And that's how I like to win football games. Get the best 5, 6, 7 actors that we can get our hands on. And because of Danny, we were able to get our hands on the best 5, 6, 7 actors and put them on the field and remarked on. In first act, he looks nothing like him. In the second act, he's been given a haircut, still looks nothing like him, just looks 4 years older, which is what he's supposed to do. And when he came, now that we did this, we had a very luxurious rehearsal period for this. It was all done in San Francisco, and we rehearsed 2 weeks and then shot just the first act. We rehearsed the first act for just 2 weeks and then shot just the first act. Then shut down everything, rehearsed the second act for 2 weeks and shot just the second act, and the same thing with the third. And the first day that Michael came on set, for the first day of shooting for the third act, the crew, the cast, everybody did, one of those, because it was just one more haircut, the turtleneck, and the glasses, and suddenly, yes, he bore more of a resemblance to Steve Jobs, but you felt like it took the first 2 acts for this character to struggle and find his way to who Steve Jobs was. It actually had a remarkable effect that none of us were anticipating. It was a delightful unintended consequence. But I say unintended consequence. I don't want to take credit for Michael. It was a great performance that he gave in the third act.
When you've done Aaron, when you've done Newsroom, and a lot of the actors talked about it, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And then you just get to work, and they're really good actors. They do the work, do the work. You can't walk in kind of sort of knowing it from the makeup chair. Can't do that with this one. You're gonna blow up in front of the camera. We saw it on Newsroom. Michael didn't do that. He was prepared. He took those rehearsal weeks and went to work, so that when you're staring at him across a scene, he's there because he knows the lines. They're second nature, and now you can both dance on them, as I call it, and that's what you want. That's what you look for, and he does that.
And no frou-frou from either of these guys, or frankly from anyone who was in the movie. My first movie was A Few Good Men, and that had some. You know who's in that movie. There are a number of movie stars in that movie. And the time it took, from the time the director, Rob Reiner, would kind of say, okay, settle, let's go, the time it took for the various entourages and different hair and makeup people to kind of clear, it was another half hour. Michael and Jeff have people, you know? You just never saw them on the set. Michael, for instance, wanted a dialect coach for this. If you speak to Michael in person, as you have, he has a lovely Irish-German accent. He is Irish-German, so that makes sense. Kate also had a dialect coach for her like Polish accent that she'd be doing as Joanna Hoffman. Neither wanted them on the set. And in rehearsal, they were over there. And during a break, would come up to them and give them some notes on a word, or would go to their trailer and work with them. But on the set, you've never seen so few people on a movie set. By the way, no chairs on this set either. And I don't know if you've had this before, but Danny just decided this was a standing up movie, and nobody, usually you get to the set and there's a chair and your name is on it and you ask for the finest bagels and all and now that I think about it, maybe there were no chairs to discourage me from being on the set in the first place, but that didn't work. But there were no chairs. If you wanted to sit, you had to go.
It's said a lot, but it's true. You can hear Aaron's rhythm. And as you learn it makes itself more evident. You have to treat it, and and I've done this on movies. I mentioned it before, where you kind of sort of know it, but you're going to paraphrase it and make it real, and make it come alive in front of the camera, and you'll get about 75% of what was written, which was okay if it's written by people that aren't really writers or executives who have noted it or put notes in it or something. But when you have a writer, and in this case, newsroom and jobs, you don't change a word. You don't ad-lib, you don't improvise. That's a luxury, I find. So learn what he wrote. And then once you get the rhythm of it, and once you get it in your head, you have to the repetition of it. You have to do more work than you've ever done on any movie or television script you've done up to this point, because it's not that there's a lot of it, it's that you have to get on top of it so it's just thoughts falling out of your head. You happen to be a really smart guy who has an opinion about whether the country is the greatest country in the world or not, and now he's gotten poked, and now out it comes. And it has to fall out. And if you don't quite know it, or you're doing star school stuff where you think you're going to rely on some of your old tricks that you can do that you've done in every movie or TV show, that little dip, whatever your little tricks are, then you're cheating. And especially something like this and someone like him, you bring everything you've ever learned. And Newsroom really taught me to reinvest in the work it takes to be definitive. And that scene and that character, because of what we did together with other people, you can't imagine anyone else playing that role. And that's the ultimate compliment I think an actor can get. And that's what you shoot for. And you have to work in order to get that. And so that's the approach.
And just to bring it back to Steve Jobs, which is why we're here. Listen, I know Michael is in every frame of the movie. Writing it, I actually always thought of it as an ensemble piece. I knew there was one guy who was going to have more lines than everybody else. But I always thought of it as an ensemble piece, which is what I like best, really. And an ensemble piece where there were going to be a lot of duets. And watching, especially, listen, the Act 3 scene between Steve and Scully always tears me apart. When I do these Q&As, as you know, I always slip in the back for the Steve Scully scene because I really like it. But it's the Act 2 scene, that kind of 15-minute fist fight between these two guys. Watching them shoot it, it was like watching. I don't know why I feel like it was watching women's tennis instead of men's tennis, but and I think it's because in women's tennis, for some reason, you hear that grunt louder. Yeah, duh! And watching you guys hit it back and forth, it just, after like minutes and minutes of the scene, because they'd be very long takes, that we would do, it would be like, I just finished playing Macbeth, and I've been on Broadway 19 times, and it was really a sight to see. It was, this is my scene, I don't think so.